Welcome everyone to Midnight Experiences, where the trees grow tall enough to block out the sky, and some of the people who walk beneath them don't walk back out the same. Tonight we have 3 accounts, 3 people, 3 national forests in 3 different corners of this country. What connects them isn't the location or the creature or the experience, it's what was different about them after. The way the people who knew them best stood across a room and felt something they couldn't name, a wrongness, a gap. A version of a person that was almost exactly right. Almost. I have not changed a single detail in any of these accounts. Each person asked to remain anonymous, except for the first names I'll use. Listen carefully. And if someone you love comes back from the woods and something feels off, trust that feeling. Trust it completely. I'm 51 years old, and I live in Harrisburg, Illinois, which is a small city in Saline County, in the southern part of the state. The part that people from Chicago don't think about, and that people from here don't talk about much outside their own county lines. I've lived here my whole life, except for 2 years at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, which is 40 miles northwest, and which I left when Ray and I got married in 1994, and which I've never particularly missed. I'm telling this story because Ray won't, not because he doesn't remember it, or because he's been told not to. He's not that kind of man, and nobody tells Ray Callahan what he can and can't say. He won't tell it, because there's a part of it that he believes is his fault, and Ray has never been comfortable with the idea that something bad happened because of him, even when that's not what the facts support. So I'm telling it. I was there for the part that happened at home. He was there for the part that happened in the Shawnee. Between us, we have the whole picture. Ray has been hunting deer in the Shawnee National Forest since he was 14 years old. His father hunted it before him, and his father's father before that. 3 generations of Callahan men walking the same ridgelines in Pope County every November, using the same access points off Trigg Tower Road, camping in the same hollow in the Garden of the Gods area that Ray's grandfather had camped in during the 1950s, when the forest was a different kind of wild than it is now. Ray is, and I want to describe him accurately because it matters for this account, one of the most grounded and practical people I have ever met in my life. He is 53 years old. He runs the second shift at the Tronox plant in Hamilton County, which means he supervises 42 people doing chemical processing work with the kind of precision and attention to process that doesn't accommodate imprecision or imagination. He fixes his own truck. He reads Louis L'Amour novels and fishing reports and the maintenance logs for his equipment. He does not, as a rule, tell stories he can't verify, which is why, when he came home from the Shawnee on the evening of November 14th, 2019, and sat at the kitchen table and looked at me, with eyes that weren't quite his, and said, in a voice that was almost but not entirely his voice, that he'd had a good hunt and didn't see anything unusual, I knew something was wrong. I need to explain what I mean by not quite his eyes and not entirely his voice, because these are the kinds of details that sound like a grieving wife or an unreliable narrator when you describe them, and I'm neither. I'm a woman who has been married to one man for 25 years, and who knows that man, the way you know the rooms of your own house in the dark, by feel, by memory, by the specific and unrepeatable texture of familiarity. Ray's eyes are a particular shade of brown, not dark brown, not amber, a warm middle brown with a slight green cast in certain light, the color of creek water over a gravel bed. I've looked into those eyes across a kitchen table for 25 years. The eyes that looked at me on November 14th were the right color, the right shape, set in the right face, but the way they moved was wrong. Ray's eyes move with the ease of a person who is comfortable in his skin, who has lived in the same place his whole life, and expects to recognize everything he sees. These eyes move with a different quality, a scanning quality, as if everything in my kitchen, the countertop, the coffee maker, the refrigerator with the calendar on it, and the photos of our daughters, was being catalogued, assessed, cross-referenced against some interior template. His voice was wrong in a subtler way. Ray has a Southern Illinois accent that has lived in him so long it's part of his structure, the particular flatness of certain vowels, the specific way he drops the ends of words in casual speech, the rhythm of his sentences, which I could reproduce from memory because I've heard it 10,000 times. The voice on November 14th had all of those features. All of them, but they were being applied rather than produced. The difference between someone who has an accent and someone who is performing an accent, when the performance is good enough that you can't point to a specific error. I said, "Did you have a good trip?" He said he had. I said, "Did you see anything?" Of answers. Minimal, factual, delivered without elaboration, because Ray doesn't elaborate unless you ask specifically. And I sat across from him, and I smiled, and I said I was glad he was home. And then I went upstairs, and I sat on the edge of our bed, and I tried to figure out whether I was losing my mind. Our daughters were 17 and 14 that November. Emma was a senior at Harrisburg High, and Lily was a freshman. Both of them were home that evening, and both of them had greeted their father with the routine affection of teenagers. Quick hug, minimal eye contact, back to their phones. Neither of them had noticed anything wrong. I told myself that was evidence. If my daughters, who had also known Ray their whole lives, hadn't noticed anything, maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was tired. Maybe a week in the field does things to a person's manner that I'd simply forgotten about in the years since he'd hunted with buddies rather than alone. He'd gone alone this year, for the first time in a while, because his regular hunting partner Dennis had been recovering from knee surgery and couldn't go. Maybe being alone for 7 days in the Shawnee had changed something superficial about the way he carried himself. Maybe I was noticing nothing but the residue of solitude. I almost convinced myself. At dinner, he asked Lily about her volleyball season, using her team name correctly, and asked Emma about her college applications using the right college names. He used the right names for everything. He sat in his chair. The right chair? The one on the south side of the table nearest the window where he always sat. He held his fork the way Ray holds his fork, in the left hand between the index finger and the middle finger, which is a thing I'd teased him about for 2 decades. A grip he picked up from his father and never corrected. All of it was right. Every detail. That's what scared me more than anything else. Ray is not a man who notices small things right unless he's looking for them. He's not a man who recounts exact details when a summary will serve. But this version of him, at dinner, was providing specifics with a completeness and a consistency that was not Ray's register. When Emma asked him what the forest was like this year, he described it: the color of the leaves, the condition of the trail, the quality of the light in the Garden of the Gods section at dawn, in language that was more careful and more sensory than anything I'd heard from Ray in 25 years of marriage. He was working very hard at being Ray. After dinner, he went to the garage to unload the truck, which was normal. Ray always broke down his hunting gear the night he got home, cleaned his rifle, stored the equipment. I watched from the kitchen window as he worked. He moved like Ray. The specific, slightly favoring his left knee gait that Ray had developed after a ligament strain in 2015 that had never fully healed. The way he lifted the truck's tailgate with his hip when his hands were full. All of it. I called his cell phone. I watched through the window as the man in the garage reached into his jacket pocket and answered it without looking at the screen. "Yeah?" he said. Ray's way of answering calls from me. "How was the drive home?" I said. "Long," he said. "Stopped for gas at the Pilot in Marion. Diesel's up again." I looked at the truck in the garage. The truck had Illinois plates and a Polk County hunting sticker in the rear window and a scrape along the driver's side rear panel from when Ray had misjudged a gatepost in 2017, and which he had also never gotten around to fixing. "Which pump?" I said. A pause. 1 beat. Half a second. "Number 4, he said. That pause. That was the one thing I couldn't explain away. In 25 years, Ray Callahan had never paused before answering a simple factual question. Ray doesn't pause. Ray's mind runs at 1 speed, and his mouth runs at that speed, and there is no gap between knowing and saying, because he isn't the kind of person who edits himself or considers his words. The pause was small, half a second. The pause of a person pulling up a file, rather than accessing a memory. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the girls had gone upstairs, waiting for him to come in from the garage, and I thought about what I was going to do. I thought about calling Dennis, who was the person who would know Ray best after me. I thought about whether there was a medical explanation, some kind of dissociative episode, some consequence of whatever had happened in the forest that I didn't know about yet. I thought about whether I was going to be the kind of woman who let her husband sleep in her bed without knowing what was looking out of his eyes. I decided I wasn't. When he came in from the garage and said he was going to shower and head to bed, I told him I'd be up in a minute. Then I waited until I heard the shower running, and I went to the garage, and I went through his truck, not searching for evidence of infidelity or deception, searching for Ray, for something that would tell me where the actual Ray Callahan was, and what had happened to him in the Shawnee National Forest over the previous 7 days. The truck smelled like the Shawnee, that dense layered smell of a southern Illinois November forest, dead leaves and damp soil and gun oil, and the specific cedar and hickory cold that comes off those ridgelines in late fall. The smell was right. The equipment in the bed was right. His field pack, his rifle case, his sleeping bag compressed in its stuff sack, all of it, Ray's. All of it correctly packed in Ray's sequence, which I know because I've watched him pack and unpack it enough times. His hunting journal was in the center console. Ray has kept a hunting journal since he was 14, at his father's suggestion, a spiral notebook in which he records the date and location and conditions and whatever he saw or took each day in the field. It is the most consistent document in his life, 39 years of November records, in a series of identical spiral notebooks, kept on a shelf in the garage. I opened it to this year's entries. His handwriting, recognizable, the cramped left-hand print of a man who learned to write at a time when left-handedness was still sometimes discouraged, and who developed his own half-print, half-script as a result. The entries for the first 5 days of the trip were Ray. I read them, and they were Ray. Brief, factual, weather observations, deer activity, shot opportunities missed or declined, the kind of thing you'd find in any experienced hunter's journal. The entry for November 13th, 1 day before he came home, was different. Not in handwriting. The handwriting was Ray's. The date was written in Ray's format, but the entry was 2 pages long, which was 3 times his normal length, and the language was not Ray's language. I'm going to read you what it said, exactly as it said it, because I copied it out before I put the journal back. November 13th. Temperature 28 degrees Fahrenheit at first light. Hunted the east ridge above the hollow until mid-morning. Nothing moving. Came back to camp at approximately 10. Found camp disturbed, not by animals. Pack had been moved and replaced. Fire ring reset. I know how I left it. Around noon, I heard something at the tree line at the south end of the hollow, about 60 yards. I thought it was a deer working the edge. It wasn't a deer. It was standing upright at the edge of the tree line, and it was looking at me, and it had my face. I want to be accurate. It had my face and my height, and it was wearing my clothes, or clothes that looked exactly like mine. I could not move for approximately 5 minutes. When I looked away and looked back, it was gone. I broke camp immediately and started out. I believe I was followed to the truck. I do not know what followed me. I am writing this in the truck at the Trigg Tower Road access point. It is in the passenger seat next to me. It has not moved since I got in. I'm going to drive home now. I don't know what else to do. I put the journal back exactly as I'd found it. I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, while the thing that was wearing my husband slept in my bed upstairs with my husband's stillness and my husband's breathing pattern, and I tried to work through what I knew and what I didn't know, and what I was going to do about it. What I knew. Ray had encountered something in the Shawnee, something that had his face, and either Ray had written that journal entry while in a state of extreme distress and was now home and fine, and the thing he'd seen was something he'd been able to leave behind, or Ray had not been able to leave it behind, and what was sleeping upstairs in my bed was not my husband. I called Dennis at 2:15 in the morning. His wife answered, irritated, and I told her it was Carol Callahan, and I was sorry for the hour, but I needed to talk to Dennis about Ray. Dennis got on the phone with the weighted alertness of a man who is used to being called about problems. I told him everything, including the journal entry. Dennis was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very carefully, Carol, has it done anything threatening? I told him no. Has it hurt you or the girls? No. Has it tried to leave the property or go anywhere? No. It had come inside, eaten dinner, gone to the garage, come in, showered, gone to bed. Dennis said, my grandfather hunted the Shawnee. He said it in the way people start sentences that are going somewhere complicated. He told me something once, when I was about 12, that my dad told me to ignore because my grandfather was getting old and talking strange. He told me there were things in that forest that could follow you home wearing your shape, and that the reason they followed you home wasn't to hurt you. I asked him what the reason was. Dennis said, he told me they do it to protect something, that something in the forest decides you're a threat, and it sends, he called it a shadow, a version of you that stays near you to keep you from going back, to keep you out of the part of the forest where something important is. He paused. I thought he was confused. I told him that. I was 12 years old, and I told my grandfather he was confused. I looked at the ceiling, above which my husband or something, wearing my husband, was asleep. What do we do? I said. Dennis said he'd call me back. He called back at 3 in the morning, after a conversation with someone he wouldn't name, and he told me 2 things. First, do not try to remove it by force, and do not bring anyone to the house who would try to do that. Second, Ray was still in the forest, still alive. The shadow doesn't replace the person it copies. It leaves them where it found them, in a contained state, while it goes home in their place. And if you destroy the shadow without going back for the original, you lose the original. I asked him how he knew Ray was still alive. He said, because if Ray were dead, the shadow would have no shape to hold. It would have already collapsed. The shadow was in my house for 4 days before we got Ray back. 4 days during which it ran his shift at the plant and drove the girls to school and ate dinner at the table, and during which I watched it perform my husband with an exactness that got more fluent each day, as if it was learning him in real time, downloading the particulars of his life through proximity to the people and places that defined him. On the 4th day, Dennis drove me to the Shawnee, to the hollow below the Garden of the Gods, to the campsite that 3 generations of Callahan men had used in November. We found Ray sitting against a hickory tree at the edge of the camp, in the same position, in the same clothes, as the last entry in the journal. Alive, awake, cold and dehydrated, and unable to explain, clearly and coherently, how 4 days had passed without his full awareness of them. When I touched his hand, his eyes went clear in a way I recognized the absence of in the shadow's eyes. That specific ease, the creek water brown, with the green cast in the afternoon light, coming through the November trees. Carol, he said. Ray, I said. We drove home. The shadow was gone when we got there. No trace, no sign of departure. Just gone, the way a reflection goes when you step away from the mirror. What I know, and what I want to say clearly, as the person who watched those 4 days from the inside, the shadow never once, in 4 days, did anything harmful. It went to work, it fed my daughters. It shoveled the neighbor's walk when it snowed on the 3rd day, because that's what Ray does when it snows. It performed my husband's life with care and precision, and something that, if I'm honest, felt like protectiveness. Not of me, of something in the forest. It was keeping Ray's body in the world, so that whatever it was guarding in the Shawnee had a guarantee of non-interference. Ray went back to the Shawnee once, in the spring, when the snow was out of the hollow and the forest was coming back. He went back alone, on a clear morning in April, and he walked to the hollow, and he stood at the edge of the camp, and he looked at the tree line, where he'd seen his own face looking back at him, and he said, and this is the only time Ray has told any part of this account himself, sitting at this same kitchen table, he said it felt like standing at the edge of something he wasn't supposed to understand. He said, whatever is in there, it's been in there a long time, and it doesn't want anything from us. It just wants us to leave it alone. Ray doesn't hunt the Shawnee anymore. He hunts farther north now, in Coles County, where his grandmother's family was from, and where the forest is younger and thinner, and doesn't have that particular quality of depth that the Shawnee has. That sense of layered time, of a landscape that was old before there were people to describe it. He doesn't talk about what he remembers from those 4 days. He says there isn't much to remember. A sense of waiting, a sense of cold that was more than temperature, a sense of something watching over him that wasn't threatening and wasn't comforting, but was simply, relentlessly there. He came home from the Shawnee, and something came with him, and something sent him back. I don't know what lives in that hollow in Pope County, Illinois. I don't know if Dennis's grandfather's word for it is right, or if there's a better word, or if there's any word at all that covers it. I know that it wore my husband's face for 4 days, and did nothing worse with that face than live his life more carefully than he usually does. And I know that whatever it was guarding in that forest, in those old dense ridgelines above the Garden of the Gods, it valued what it guarded enough to send a piece of itself into the world to protect it. I find I can't entirely call that wrong, but I check Ray's eyes every single morning. I will check them every morning for the rest of my life. And if the creek water brown, with the green cast in the right light, ever looks like something being performed, rather than something lived, I'll be on the phone to Dennis before he finishes his coffee. Some things you can't unknow. That's one of them. Now I want to tell you about what happened over the next 3 weeks, because the phone call was the beginning rather than the end. My mother started researching, because that is what she does when she encounters something outside her framework. She researches it, the way she researched her own diagnosis when she had a kidney stone in 2018, and came to a doctor's appointment with 14 printed pages of notes. She pulled the historical records for the Hawksbill Mountain Trail and the surrounding sections of the Upper Pisgah. She pulled the Forest Service Trail documentation going back to the CCC-era construction of the trail system in the 1930s. She found documents that the Pisgah Ranger District had digitized as part of a historical preservation project, scanned images of handwritten construction notes and survey records from 1931 and 1932. On the third day of research, she called me again. Different voice this time, not shaken, not the careful controlled sound of the first call. Urgent. She had found the names. In the 1932 construction notes for the North Hawksbill section, the exact section her crew had been working, there were two names recorded as crew supervisors. A man named Thomas Aldridge and a woman named Ruth Aldridge, listed as married, from Avery County. Construction foreman for the CCC trail building project in that section. She had heard two voices, a man and a woman. She had heard them clearly enough to note that they were married in their manner of speaking to each other. The easy shorthand of two people who have been working together long enough that they don't complete all their sentences. I heard them, Patrick, she said. I heard Thomas and Ruth Aldridge talking about that trail in 1932. I don't know how. I don't know why, but I heard them. And they were talking about something in the ground beneath the trail. Something they'd found during construction and decided to work around rather than through. Something they marked and sealed and documented. She paused. And the phrase I heard about the line being broken and the old ones walking through, that phrase is in the construction notes, verbatim, in Thomas Aldridge's handwriting. I drove to Asheville the following weekend. I sat with my mother at her kitchen table, and I looked at the scanned construction notes, and she showed me the line. In 1932 handwriting, slightly faded, on yellowed paper, the corridor line is broken, the old ones will walk through, and there is no undoing that. And below it, in smaller handwriting, that the scan captured only partially, we have marked the trees and sealed the approach. Do not disturb the section between markers. My mother's trail crew had been working that section for 3 seasons. The markers, whatever Thomas and Ruth Aldridge had placed in 1932 to indicate the corridor boundaries, were not in any current Forest Service documentation. They would have been on living trees in 1932, and those trees, in 90 years, would have either incorporated the markers into their growth rings or died and fallen. The markers were gone. The people who knew about them were gone. The knowledge of what was beneath that section of trail was gone, and the trail crew doing tread restoration above it had been unknowingly reopening, inch by inch, over 3 seasons of work, whatever Thomas Aldridge had sealed. She reported it. I want to tell you that, because it matters, my mother did not sit on this information. She filed a report with the Pisgah Ranger District and with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, who were the relevant tribal authority for that part of the Pisgah. She included the 1932 construction notes, her own account of what she'd experienced, and a request for a cultural resource assessment of the Hawksbill North section. The assessment was initiated within 60 days. I have not been told the full results, because they are classified at the tribal resource level, and my mother, as a contractor rather than a federal employee, received only a partial response. What the response told her was that the section was being placed under a temporary maintenance moratorium, that a consultation with Cherokee traditional knowledge holders was in process, and that the section she'd identified had been known to multiple generations of Cherokee people under a name that translates, approximately, as the crossing place. Her crew has not worked that section since. My mother finished her season in September 2021 and came home to Asheville and did not go back to the Pisgah for trail work the following season. Not because she was told not to, not because of trauma, but because she came back from that forest knowing something that she had not known before, something that sits in her now, like a compass needle, that won't stop pointing at that hillside above Linville Gorge. And she has decided that the right response to knowing what she knows is to stay away from the things she knows about. She is still, as she always was, a literal-minded and practical person. She still reads the science section. She still trusts what she can observe. She has added one thing to what she trusts, what she heard. 2 people in the October forest, a man and a woman talking about something important. The line is broken, and the old ones walk through. She says it to me sometimes, when I call in the evening, and we're talking about other things, and the conversation gets quiet. She says it quietly, like a reminder to herself, rather than a statement to me, like a person who has been given a piece of information that was not meant for them, and has decided to hold it carefully, rather than put it down. I haven't been to the Hawksbill North section. I have no plans to go, but I know where it is. And I think about it, on certain nights, in the way that you think about places that have been described to you, with enough precision and enough honesty that they exist in your mind with the reality of somewhere you've actually been. An October forest floor, even in August. The wrong season light. The voices of people who have been dead for 90 years discussing the obligations of the living. My mother is different since that August. Not wrong. I want to be precise about that. Not the wrongness you hear described in accounts like this one. The gap, the absence. She is, if anything, more present than she was before. More specific. She looks at things longer. She listens in the woods, the way you listen when you've learned that the woods sometimes talk back. She is the same person, with more in her. Whether the more is something she should have or not, I can't say. I only know that Thomas and Ruth Aldridge tried to protect something in 1932 with the tools available to them, which were tree blazes and handwritten notes, and the hope that whoever came after them would pay attention. We didn't pay attention, and my mother spent 20 minutes in a space between two old-growth hemlocks, and came back with the knowledge of what that costs. She will carry it carefully. That's who she is. My name is Patrick. I'm 26 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. My mother, whose name is Diane, is 58. She has been doing seasonal trail maintenance work for the Forest Service in the Pisgah since I was in high school. Every summer from May through September, working with the Pisgah Ranger District on the trail crews that maintain the backcountry trail system in the Wilson Creek and Grandfather Mountain areas of the forest. I'm going to tell you what happened to her in the summer of 2021. But I'm going to start with what she was like before it happened, because the before and after matter equally in this account. My mother is, and has always been, a straightforward and literal-minded person. This is not a criticism. It is an accurate description of a woman who spent 30 years as a respiratory therapist at Mission Hospital before retiring early and taking the trail work because she missed being outdoors and found that she had a physical capacity for hard labor that sitting in a hospital hadn't used. She is a person who trusts what she can observe. She is a person who reads the science section of the newspaper and the maintenance guides for her equipment and the trail condition reports from the previous season, and who uses those things to make decisions that are grounded and practical and reliable. She is not imaginative in the expansive sense of the word. She is not a person given to interpretation or embellishment. She called me on a Tuesday evening in August 2021, and the first thing she said, before hello, before any preamble, was, "Patrick, I need to tell you something, and I need you not to tell me I'm confused." I told her I was listening. She said she'd been in the forest. Her crew had been working a section of the Hawksbill Mountain Trail in the Upper Pisgah, the north-facing slope section above Linville Gorge, at approximately 4,300 feet elevation. They'd been doing tread restoration, a process involving clearing encroaching vegetation, re-establishing drainage structures, repairing erosion damage on the trail surface. Work she'd done dozens of times over 6 seasons. She'd gone slightly off trail at midday to eat her lunch in a flat section of the forest, away from the active work area, about 40 yards off the marked trail, in a space between two large old-growth hemlocks, where the ground was level and dry, and the light came through the canopy at an angle that made it a pleasant place to sit. She'd sat there before. She knew the spot. She ate her lunch, drank her water, sat for about 20 minutes in the way she always sat on lunch breaks. Not meditating, not particularly reflective, just resting in the mechanical and restorative way of someone who works hard physically and has learned to use stillness efficiently. And then she said, the light changed, not dramatically, not like a cloud passing over the sun, not like a weather shift. The light in that specific space between the hemlocks changed quality in a way she described carefully to me on the phone, searching for the right words in the way she does when something is outside her usual vocabulary. She said it was as if the light became older, as if the wavelength of it shifted towards something more amber, more afternoon, though the time was noon and the sun was directly overhead. The shadows moved, subtly, the way shadows move when light changes angle, but the angle of the light through the canopy didn't change. The shadows moved on their own. Then she heard voices. Not loud, not close, about the distance and volume of people talking normally on the far side of a room, audible, discernible as voices, not quite intelligible. She turned toward the sound, and she said the forest looked different in the direction she turned, not dramatically different. The same hemlocks, the same undergrowth, the same leaf-covered floor, but the undergrowth was different species. She couldn't name all of them, but some of them she didn't recognize as plants that grow at that elevation in western North Carolina. Younger plants, different growth pattern, and the leaf litter on the forest floor was deeper, and the color of it was the wrong autumn, too orange, too recent. The October leaf fall color rather than the compacted brown of summer forest floor in August. The voices got clearer, not louder, clearer, as if she were tuning into them rather than approaching them. Two people, a man and a woman, English, American, but accented in a way she described as old-fashioned, not in the theatrical sense, but in the genuine way that vowels and rhythms shift across generations. Talking about the trail. She was certain of that, about the trail, about the section above Limville Gorge, about something they were building or marking or deciding, and she heard the word corridor more than once, and she heard the word disturb more than once, and she heard a phrase that she asked me to write down exactly as she heard it, which I did, and which I am going to give you now exactly as my mother gave it to me. What she heard was, if the line is broken, the old ones walk through. Then she heard footsteps in the leaf litter, approaching her position. She looked in the direction of the sound, and there was nobody there. The undergrowth was wrong season and wrong species, and there was nobody there, and the footsteps continued approaching, and my mother, who is, as I have told you, a literal-minded and practical person, stood up and walked back to the trail, and didn't stop walking until she reached the crew's worksite, and sat down on a log, and looked at her hands for several minutes. She told the crew supervisor that she had a headache, and needed to take a short break in the shade, which was not true, but was a reasonable statement that required no explanation. The supervisor told her to take her time. She called me that evening. Now I want to tell you about what happened over the next 3 weeks, because the phone call was the beginning rather than the end. Because that is what she does when she encounters something outside her framework. She researches it, the way she researched her own diagnosis when she had a kidney stone in 2018 and came to a doctor's appointment with 14 printed pages of notes. She pulled the historical records for the Hawkesbill Mountain Trail and the surrounding sections of the Upper Pisgah. She pulled the Forest Service Trail documentation going back to the CCC era construction of the trail system in the 1930s. She found documents the Pisgah Ranger District had digitized as part of a historical preservation project, scanned images of handwritten construction notes and survey records from 1931 and 1932. The third day of research, she called me again. Different voice this time, not shaken, not the careful controlled sound of the first call. Urgent. She had found the names. In the 1932 construction notes for the North Hawkesbill section, the exact section her crew had been working, there were two names recorded as crew supervisors. A man named Thomas Aldridge and a woman named Ruth Aldridge, listed as married, from Avery County. Construction foreman for the CCC trail building project in that section. She had heard two voices, a man and a woman. She had heard them clearly enough to note that they were married in their manner of speaking to each other, the easy shorthand of two people who have been working together long enough that they don't complete all their sentences. I heard them, Patrick, she said. I heard Thomas and Ruth Aldridge talking about that trail in 1932. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I heard them. And they were talking about something in the ground beneath the trail, something they'd found during construction and decided to work around rather than through, something they marked and sealed and documented. She paused, and the phrase I heard, about the line being broken and the old ones walking through, that phrase is in the construction notes, verbatim, in Thomas Aldridge's handwriting. I drove to Asheville the following weekend. I sat with my mother at her kitchen table, and I looked at the scanned construction notes, and she showed me the line. In 1932 handwriting, slightly faded, on yellowed paper. If the corridor line is broken, the old ones will walk through, and there is no one doing that. And below it, in smaller handwriting, that the scan captured only partially, we have marked the trees and sealed the approach. Do not disturb the section between markers. My mother's trail crew had been working that section for 3 seasons. The markers, whatever Thomas and Ruth Aldridge had placed in 1932 to indicate the corridor boundaries, were not in any current Forest Service documentation. They would have been on living trees in 1932, and those trees, in 90 years, would have either incorporated the markers into their growth rings or died and fallen. The markers were gone. The people who knew about them were gone. The knowledge of what was beneath that section of trail was gone, and the trail crew doing tread restoration above it had been unknowingly reopening, inch by inch, over 3 seasons of work, whatever Thomas Aldridge had sealed. She reported it. I want to tell you that, because it matters. My mother did not sit on this information. She filed a report with the Pisgah Ranger District and with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. who were the relevant tribal authority for that part of the Pisgah. She included the 1932 construction notes, her own account of what she'd experienced, and a request for a cultural resource assessment of the Hawkesville. I have not been told the full results, because they are classified at the tribal resource level, and my mother, as a contractor rather than a federal employee, received only a partial response. What the response told her was that the section was being placed under a temporary maintenance moratorium, that a consultation with Cherokee traditional knowledge holders was in process, and that the section she'd identified had been known to multiple generations of Cherokee people under a name that translates, approximately, as the crossing place. Her crew has not worked that section since. My mother finished her season in September 2021 and came home to Asheville and did not go back to the Pisgah for trail work the following season. Not because she was told not to, not because of trauma, but because she came back from that forest knowing something that she had not known before, something that sits in her now, like a compass needle, that won't stop pointing at that hillside above Linville Gorge, and she has decided that the right response to knowing what she knows is to stay away from the thing she knows about. She is still, as she always was, a literal-minded and practical person. She still reads the science section. She still trusts what she can observe. She has added one thing to what she trusts, what she heard. 2 people in the October forest, a man and a woman talking about something important. The line is broken, and the old ones walk through. She says it to me sometimes, when I call in the evening, and we're talking about other things, and the conversation gets quiet. She says it quietly, like a reminder to herself, rather than a statement to me. Like a person who has been given a piece of information that was not meant for them, and has decided to hold it carefully, rather than put it down. I haven't been to the Hawkesville North section. I have no plans to go, but I know where it is, and I think about it, on certain nights, in the way that you think about places that have been described to you, with enough precision and enough honesty that they exist in your mind with the reality of somewhere you've actually been. An October forest floor, even in August, the wrong season light, the voices of people who have been dead for 90 years, discussing the obligations of the living. My mother is different since that August. Not wrong. I want to be precise about that. Not the wrongness you hear described in accounts like this one. The gap, the absence. She is, if anything, more present than she was before. More specific. She looks at things longer. She listens in the woods the way you listen when you've learned that the woods sometimes talk back. She is the same person, with more in her. Whether the more is something she should have or not, I can't say. I only know that Thomas and Ruth Aldridge tried to protect something in 1932 with the tools available to them, which were tree blazes and handwritten notes, and the hope that whoever came after them would pay attention. We didn't pay attention, and my mother spent 20 minutes in a space between 2 old-growth hemlocks, and came back with the knowledge of what that costs. She will carry it carefully. That's who she is. Story 3. My son came back from the Tongass, but he wasn't alone. I'm going to call myself Marcus. That's not my real name, but it's close enough that I can use it without feeling like I'm lying, which matters to me in telling this. I'm 52 years old. I live in Ketchikan, Alaska, which is a fishing town of about 8,000 people, on the western edge of Revillagigedo Island, in the Alaska Panhandle, accessible by sea or air. No roads in or out. The kind of place where the rain averages 13 feet a year, and where the Tongass National Forest comes down to the water on 3 sides, and up into the mountains on all the others. An unbroken dark green wall of Sitka spruce, and red cedar and western hemlock. That is one of the largest temperate rainforest systems in the world, and that feels, on certain days when the fog is low, and the light is green-grey, and the trees press close to the shoreline, like it belongs to a different version of the planet than the one you normally inhabit. I've run charter fishing boats out of Ketchikan for 22 years. The inland passage, the straits, the coves and inlets of the Alexander Archipelago. I know this water, the way a person knows their own driveway. I've taken halibut boats through fog conditions that would make most captains heave to and wait. I have navigated the Tongass Narrows at minus tide in a 70-foot boat. The water here is not abstract to me, and neither is the forest beside it. My son Danny was 17 when this happened. Now he's 19, and he's at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and he's fine, in the way that a person can be fine, while also being permanently changed by something they went through, which I think is the only kind of fine available to either of us after what happened in the Tongass in September of 2022. I'm going to tell you Danny's part first and then my part, because they happen separately and in sequence, and that's the only way the whole account makes sense. Danny had been hiking in the Tongass since he was old enough to walk a trail. The forest around Ketchikan is not a casual forest. It is old and dense and wet, with a floor of devil's club and blueberry and skunk cabbage and deep moss that covers everything and makes the ground deceptively soft, and it drains through creek systems that run high and fast in the fall. It is beautiful in a way that people from the lower 48 sometimes find overwhelming. Too much of everything, too green, too tall, too old, the scale of it pressing on you when you're used to sky. Danny grew up in it and loved it with the uncomplicated affection of someone who has never been scared of it. Which is why, on September 8, 2022, he went out alone on a day hike on the Upper Deer Mountain Trail, a route he'd done at least 15 times, with adequate gear and a satellite messenger, and no particular reason for anyone to be concerned. He didn't come back at the time. He'd said he'd come back. I should explain that I was in Sitka that week on a charter run that had extended by 2 days due to weather. So when Danny didn't check in at the agreed time, 6 p.m., a text to my phone, my sister-in-law Nora, who was staying at the house to look after things while I was out, was the one who noticed. She texted him. No response. She called. No answer. At 9 p.m., she called me. I ran the boat home through the dark. 7-hour run in September in the Panhandle, which is not a casual thing. I got into Ketchikan at 4 in the morning, and I called the Ketchikan Gateway Borough Search and Rescue at 4:15. And by 6 in the morning, there was a team on the Deer Mountain Trail. They found Danny at 2 in the afternoon, on the trail, not off it, in the upper section near the lake at the top of the mountain, sitting on a flat rock at the edge of the trail, with his pack between his feet and his hands in his lap, looking at the water. The search and rescue lead called me when they found him. He said Danny appeared physically uninjured. He said Danny was alert and responsive, and knew his name and the date and could follow instructions. He said they were bringing him down. Then he paused, and in the pause was something I recognized from 22 years of reading weather on the water, a pause of a person looking at something that their instruments and their experience don't fully account for. He said, "Mr. Marcus, your boy is okay, but I want to prepare you for, he's going to seem a little different than you're used to. He's been out here about 20 hours, which can do things to a person's manner. Just want you to be prepared." I said I understood. I didn't understand. Not yet. Danny came down off Deer Mountain at 5 in the afternoon of September 9th, walking between 2 search and rescue volunteers, with his pack on his back, and his gear intact, and his face. Danny's face. My son's specific and unrepeatable face that I have known for 17 years. Looking at everything around him, with an attention so complete and so comprehensive that it was, even from 30 feet away where I was standing at the trailhead parking lot, visibly wrong. Danny looks at the world the way 17-year-olds from fishing towns look at the world, with a kind of lateral, slightly distracted attention, the attention of a person who is generally aware of his surroundings, but isn't prioritizing them over his internal life. He's a good kid, a smart kid, but focused and inward in the way that adolescent boys often are. Not yet the sustained outward attention that comes with a few more years of having to pay actual consequences for inattention. The face coming down the trail toward me was wearing Danny's expression of lateral, slightly distracted awareness over the top of something much older and much more comprehensive, like a window you look through and realize there's another window on the other side of it, and through that second window is a landscape you don't recognize. He hugged me. The physical sensation of him, his height, the specific weight of his arms, the smell of his hair, which is always slightly of whatever shampoo he's using, and slightly of the outdoors. All of it was correct, completely correct. He was warm, he was solid. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry, I lost track of time." 20 hours, bud, I said. "I know, I'm sorry." I thanked the search and rescue team. I drove Danny home. On the drive, he was quiet, which was not unusual for Danny after a long day outside. He looked out the passenger window at Ketchikan Creek, and the waterfront and the ferry terminal, and the islands in the channel, and he looked at them with that doubled window attention, as if seeing them layered over something else, some other version of this same geography that was more present to him than what was actually there. At home, Nora made dinner, and Danny ate with appetite, and answered her questions about the hike with normal Danny answers. Vague, minimal, the answers of a teenager who doesn't feel the need to elaborate. I watched him across the table, and I told myself what I had been telling myself since the trailhead. He was out for 20 hours. He was tired. He was probably dehydrated. Give him a day, and he'd be Danny again. I gave him 3 days. On day 3, I knew. What I knew specifically, The thing looking out of my son's eyes was not entirely my son, was not, and this is the most careful I have been in this entire account, because this is the part where I could most easily be dismissed, was not replacing my son, was occupying the same space as my son partially. The way two things can be in the same place if one of them is permeable enough to allow it. Danny had started doing something, starting the morning of the second day. He would stop in the middle of whatever he was doing, eating, watching TV, doing dishes, and turn toward the southeast, toward the Tongass, toward the Deer Mountain Trail. He would stand or sit with his body oriented in that direction for anywhere from 10 seconds to 2 minutes. And during those intervals, his face went entirely blank, in a way that Danny's face had never in his life gone blank. Because Danny, even when he's bored, has a quality of minor internal restlessness, a small ongoing vitality that his face reflects. During the southeast-facing intervals, that vitality was absent. Something else was present, something that was using Danny's body as a compass needle, pointing home. On the fourth day, I followed him. At 2:30 in the morning on September 13th, Danny got out of bed, dressed himself in his hiking gear, silently, in the dark, with a precision and efficiency that was not his usual fumbling late-night movement, and left the house. I had been sitting in the kitchen in the dark since midnight because I had known he would do this. The same way I know weather before the instruments confirm it, from something in the water and the air that doesn't have a name, but that has never been wrong. I followed him at a distance of about 50 yards, enough to track him by sound and by the occasional glimpse of his headlamp, up the road toward the Deer Mountain trailhead. He moved fast for a 17-year-old in full pack in the dark, not unnaturally fast, but with a consistency of pace that Danny had never shown on a trail in his life, because Danny is a wanderer on trails, slow and observant and easily distracted by interesting rocks or plants or views. This was a deliberate pace, a pace with a destination. We climbed for 2 hours. The Upper Deer Mountain Trail in September, in the dark, with the Tongass pressing in on both sides of the cleared path, is not a casual walk. The spruce here are old, 200 and 300 years old, with trunks 4 and 5 feet across, and canopies that block the sky entirely in sections, so that you're moving through a dark that is deeper than outdoor dark, a dark that has absorbed a few centuries of rain and growth, and has a quality of density to it. The sounds are the sounds of old forest, drip from the canopy, the creek running somewhere below the trail, small things moving in the Devil's Club, the occasional distant calling of a bird that was awake in the middle of the night for reasons of its own. I could see Danny's headlamp ahead of me, steady, moving without hesitation, taking every turn and junction without pausing, with the certainty of something navigating by internal coordinates rather than memory of the trail. We reached the lake at the top of the mountain at around 4:30 in the morning. The lake sat in a bowl below the peak, its surface absolutely still in the windless early morning, reflecting the stars in the gap of sky above it. Danny stopped at the edge of the water, in the same flat rock where the search and rescue team had found him 5 days earlier, and he stood there and looked at the water. I came up behind him, and I said his name. He turned, and in the moment that he turned, with his headlamp swinging across my face, I saw something in his eyes that I want to try to describe, with the same care I've given every other detail in this account. Recognition. Real recognition. Danny recognition. The specific warmth of a kid who has been looked for by his father, and who knows it and feels it as the specific and irreplaceable thing that it is. For 3 or 4 seconds, whatever had been sharing space with my son stepped back, and my son was there completely, the slightly distracted adolescent vitality in full and unmistakable presence. He said, in a voice that cracked slightly in the way, his voice still sometimes cracked at 17. "Dad, I'm trying to get back. I can't get back without help." Then the presence stepped forward again, and the eyes were the doubled window eyes, and whatever was in there with Danny, oriented toward the water. I stood at the edge of the lake at 4:30 in the morning in the Tongass, and I said, to the partial presence of my son, "Tell me what to do." What followed is difficult to describe in linear narrative, because what happened was not linear. It was experiential in the way that the accounts I've heard from people who've had medical emergencies or accidents describe things. Not a sequence of events, but a simultaneous field of information that I moved through rather than along. I'll do my best. Danny, or the thing that was in Danny, or both, because I have come to understand that they were both present. That what I was dealing with was not a possession but an overlap, waded into the lake. into 43-degree Sitka spruce forest lake water in September, at 4:30 in the morning, fully clothed. I did not stop him. I have thought many times about whether I should have stopped him. I did not, because the quality of intention in him was not the quality of self-destruction, which I know, and was instead the quality of navigation. He was going somewhere. He waded to approximately the center of the lake, which was shallow enough that the water was at his waist, and he stood there, and in the water around him, and I was standing at the edge of the lake watching this, in the dark, in the cold, with every survival-trained instinct I have screaming at me that my son was standing in cold water at 4 in the morning. In the water around him, something happened to the surface. The reflection of the stars in the water changed. I want to be precise. The stars in the sky above the lake remained in their correct positions. The reflection of those stars in the water surface changed. The reflection showed a sky with more stars, a denser field, more crowded. The Milky Way in the reflected sky, a bright band, where the real sky's Milky Way was visible but dim, and the reflected trees at the lake's edge were different trees, not spruce, a different species, darker, denser, older than any living tree I knew. Danny turned in the water to face me. He said, in the doubled voice that was simultaneously him and not him, "There's a place under the water, a crossing. I went through it 5 days ago when I was hiking. I didn't know what it was. I stepped into it, and I went through it partially. Part of me is still there. I need you to come into the water with me and hold on to me when I cross back." I said, "If I come in, can I come back out?" He said, "If you're holding on to me, yes." I want to tell you that I thought carefully about this. I want to tell you that I weighed the evidence and the risk and made a rational decision. What actually happened is that I walked into the lake without taking my boots off, because he was my kid, and that is the only reasoning that was available to me. The water was very cold. The cold was the first thing, immediate, total. The cold of mountain lake water fed by snowmelt through the summer and not warm since. I waded to the center of the lake, to Danny. I put my hands on his shoulders. He turned toward the changed reflection, toward the sky that had more stars and the trees that were older and darker. He said, "Hold on." What happened when he stepped forward is something I experience differently each time I try to describe it, as if the memory is still integrating, still being processed into a form that language can access. What I can tell you is this. There was a moment of cold, much more absolute than the lake water. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the absence of everything I knew how to orient by light, sound, the pull of the earth, the sense of my own body as a bounded thing with a location. A moment in which I was aware of the reflected forest, the old dark trees, the 2 bright stars, as a real place and not a reflection. And aware that Danny was pulling away from it, pulling back through whatever membrane he had partially passed through 5 days before, pulling himself whole from a place where he had been partially stranded. I held onto his shoulders. He pulled through. I don't have better language than that. He pulled through, and the cold released, and the surface of the lake was the surface of the lake again, with the correct reflection of the correct sky. And Danny and I were standing in shoulder-deep water in the Tongass at approximately 4:45 in the morning. Both of us soaked, both of us alive, both of us shaking in a way that was partly temperature and partly something more fundamental. Danny said, "Dad," in his own voice, "completely." I said, "I've got you." We waded to shore. We sat on the flat rock in our soaking gear, and I held my son and he held me, which is not something 17-year-old boys usually voluntarily do, but which felt, in that particular moment, on that particular rock, beside that particular lake, like the only appropriate response to what had just happened. When we got our breath back and our shaking steadied, Danny told me what he remembered of the 5 days. He said, "It wasn't 5 days there, it was less than an hour. A different forest, older, the species wrong for Southeast Alaska. The trees a type he didn't know, enormous and dark and impossibly old. A sky that had too many stars. A cold that wasn't weather cold, but the cold of a different physical constant. as if the universe he'd stepped into ran at a lower baseline temperature than the one he was used to. He said nothing had tried to harm him. Nothing had approached him or addressed him or seemed aware of him in any way that he could identify as intentional. He had simply been there, in a place he could not leave, and something of him had found the membrane and pressed back through it. Enough of him to occupy his own body and point it home, like a homing signal, pulling in his father, the one person most likely to follow him, into a lake in the dark without asking enough questions first. I told him that I would have done it regardless of the questions. He said he knew. That's why it worked. We hiked down off Deer Mountain in the dark, soaking, with the dawn beginning behind the eastern peaks, and the Tongass coming back around us in the morning bird noise, and the smell of wet spruce and salt off the water. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say, in the conventional sense. There was a great deal to feel, which is a different matter. Danny is at Fairbanks now, studying environmental science, which I can't say surprises me. He hikes in the Tongass when he's home, and he goes up to the lake sometimes, and he stands at the edge and looks at the water, and he says the crossing is still there. He can see it in the reflection, the denser star field, and the older trees. He says nothing has come through it. He says nothing has tried. But he's watching. He told me he feels responsible for it, in the way that you feel responsible for a door you accidentally left open in a house that was locked. You close it as best you can, but you can't be certain the latch caught, and you think about it. He thinks about it. I think about it. The Tongass is still there. 16 million acres of old-growth temperate rainforest, the largest in the world. And somewhere in it, a lake with a surface that reflects a sky that isn't the sky above it. A membrane between this and whatever is adjacent to this, old enough that the trees on the other side are a species nobody living has a name for. My son came back from that forest. He came back whole eventually, with help, because his father was the kind of person who walks into a lake at 4:30 in the morning without taking his boots off, which is either the best quality I have or the most reckless, and I have never fully decided which. What I know is that the Tongass is not a forest you walk through casually. None of them are. These places are old in a way that doesn't reduce, doesn't simplify, doesn't become manageable the more you know about it. They were here before we were, and they will be here after we are, and they contain things, passages, memories, presences, mechanisms, that operate on timescales that don't have room for us in their consideration. We walk through them anyway. That's what people do. Just don't be surprised when you come back different. And if someone you love goes in and comes back with something behind their eyes that looks like them but isn't quite, that scans the room like it's learning the room, don't send them away. Ask them what they need to get home. The answer might be simpler than you think. Or it might require a nighttime swim in a 43-degree mountain lake in the middle of a rainforest in the dark. Either way, show up. That's all any of it asks. 3 forests. 3 people who went in whole and came out carrying something. Carol's husband, watched over by something that wore his face to keep him from going back to what it guarded. Diane, who came home from the Pisgah with the voices of the dead in her memory and the knowledge of an obligation. 3 generations of good people tried to maintain and failed. And Danny, who stepped through a door he didn't know was there and got pulled back by the one person who would follow him anywhere without enough questions. None of them are wrong. None of them are broken. They are the same people they were before the forest, with more in them than the forest gave them permission to expect. That's the thing about the old places. They don't take, they add, whether you wanted the addition or not. Thank you for listening tonight. Stay close to the people who would walk into a lake for you. Stay away from the places that feel like they're watching. And if you're ever standing at the edge of a reflection that shows a different sky than the one above you, walk away. Just walk away. We'll be here when you get back. Good night.